What if the river hadn't taken me that night? Would he still have chosen me, or would we have passed like ghosts in the rain? The storm didn't come in like a lion. It crept soft at first, whispers through cottonwood leaves, the scent of wet sage heavy in the dusk air. I was already at the edge of the creek when the sky cracked open. Not because I was trying to die, not really, but because some part of me was tired of choosing life that didn't feel like mine. My mother used to say that water remembers what fire forgets. That river had stolen things from me long before I ever stepped into it, my mother, my language, my right to belong. Maybe I thought if I offered it my body, it might finally give something back. So I waded in, fully clothed, hair pinned, heart unpinned. The current pulled at the hem of my skirt, then my knees, my ribs. By the time it reached my throat, I let go. And yet, I screamed. That was the part that surprised me most, the scream, because some part of me still wanted to be heard. I didn't see him at first. Just the thunder above and the roar of the river around me. The last thing I remember before the darkness was a splash of sudden violence that didn't belong to the storm. Then arms, rough, strong, shaking. I fought them at first thinking they were the hands of the dead come to take me. But they gripped me with a different desperation and pulled me back. I came to lying in the mud, coughing river out of my lungs and blood back into my lips. A fire crackled a few feet away, low and stubborn like the man who tended it. I blinked through rain-soaked lashes and saw him. He looked half-drowned himself. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His shirt clung to him like wet paper, torn and dirty. And still he knelt beside me, eyes like winter ice, scanning my face like it held answers he'd been chasing for years. I tried to speak. My throat burned. "You shouldn't have done that," I whispered. He didn't flinch, just sat back on his heels and said, "Neither should you." I turned away from him, embarrassed by the shiver that ran through me, not from cold, but from the weight of being seen. Really seen. My father used to look right through me. The nuns at the mission only saw what they wanted to cleanse. But this stranger, he saw something and didn't look away. I wrapped my arms tighter around the blanket he'd given me, wondering if he noticed the way my fingers trembled. "Why were you out there?" he asked, his voice low like a prayer that wasn't sure it deserved to be heard. I swallowed hard. "I could ask you the same." He didn't answer, just turned back to the fire, added another log with careful fingers, and stared into the flame as if it could explain me better than I could. We didn't talk for a while after that. The rain softened to a drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried out a long, lonely sound that echoed how I felt inside. I should have felt ashamed, or grateful, or something righteous and clean. But I just felt empty, hollowed out like the river had scooped out everything except the ache. Finally he spoke. "Name's Jonah Maddox." I nodded. "Eliza." "Eliza what? Renfield, I think." "My father was white. He never let me forget it." His eyes flicked toward me just briefly. "You Cheyenne?" "My mother was." I paused. "She died when I was 9. After that, I belonged to no one." Jonah didn't respond, but something changed in his face. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore. It softened like the coals in the fire still burning, but gentler now. He reached for his coat and draped it around my shoulders before returning to his side of the flames. His fingertips brushed the back of my neck accidentally, maybe, but they lingered just a breath too long. It was the first time in years I remembered what warmth felt like. Later that night, I asked him the question that had been clawing at my ribs since the moment I opened my eyes. "Why did you save me?" He was carving something into the handle of a broken knife. His hands stilled. The fire cracked once, loud and unexpected, but he didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, eyes meeting mine across the flickering light. "Because I wanted something in this world to be worth the risk." My breath caught. He wasn't talking about me, not directly, maybe not even consciously. But the way he said it, the quiet, matter-of-fact honesty of it felt like a match striking dry kindling in my chest. We sat in silence for a long time after that, him whittling ghosts out of wood, me holding his coat like it might stop the bleeding I hadn't known was there. And somewhere beyond the trees, the river kept moving, steady, relentless, like it had already chosen both of us, long before we ever chose each other. What kind of silence follows a storm that changes your name, your future, and the laws of the land? By morning, the rain had stopped, but the land hadn't exhaled. The air hung heavy with knowing the way a mother holds her breath when she senses something's about to break. I sat on the porch, wrapped in Jonah's coat, watching the fog lift off the meadow, like a veil being peeled back by unseen hands. Behind me, inside that small, weather-worn cabin, he moved like a man who'd broken his own rules just by letting someone stay. I heard the sound of flint and tin coffee brewing boots pacing. But neither of us said anything until he came out, handed me a steaming cup, and sat beside me like we'd been doing it for years. "I'm not who they think I am," I said quietly, though I didn't know who they even meant yet. He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee and stared out toward the trees. "I can feel them coming." This time, he did speak. "So can I." The hoofbeats came at noon, not galloping, but rhythmic, like a song written in another language. 5 distinct groups riding in slow formation over the ridge, each draped in colors I hadn't seen together since childhood, stories whispered in my mother's tongue. Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Lakota, Shoshone. I stood, blood draining from my limbs. Jonah rose too, hand drifting toward the rifle, leaning by the doorway. "No," I said, laying a hand on his arm. "Not yet." "These aren't the ones to fear." He didn't argue, but his eyes never left the horizon. They rode like a memory too real to be dream, too sacred to be coincidence. At the center of the leading group rode a man whose hair shimmered silver, even beneath the sun, braided long on both sides, the rest of his face painted in patterns I hadn't seen since my mother's burial. He dismounted first. I stepped forward before Jonah could stop me. "You wear her eyes," the elder said in Cheyenne, "and carry her wound." Tears burned the corners of my vision. "You knew my mother." He nodded solemnly. "Your mother was the last who bore the 5 blood mark. Until now. I didn't come here for this." "No," he agreed. "You came to surrender, but the river returned you. That means something." Jonah approached from behind his boots, thudding softly in the wet earth. "This your land?" he asked gruffly. The elder turned. "No. But neither is it yours. It belongs to the story that brought you here." Jonah blinked. "That's real poetic. Doesn't answer the question." A quiet ripple of amusement passed through some of the riders, but the elder stayed grave. "Are you the one who pulled her from the current I am? Then you are part of the story now." The other elders began to dismount, forming a wide semicircle. One by one, they placed offerings at Jonah's feet, some wrapped in red cloth, others in bare hands, obsidian knives, painted shields, a bow of ancient elk horn, a feathered headdress too fine to belong to a warrior still living. Jonah took a step back, visibly rattled. "What is this?" "A recognition," said the silver-haired man. "A warning. A hope." A young girl no older than I was when my mother died stepped forward with something wrapped tightly in dyed leather. She placed it in my hands, and when I unwrapped it, I felt my breath catch. A stone, black as night, streaked with threads of molten gold, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of something not quite dead. "This was your mother's," the girl said. "She gave her life to protect it." I touched it, and the world fell away. I saw a valley covered in mist, hidden between 2 mountains that did not exist on any map. I saw fire, not destructive, but purifying. I saw 5 tribes gathering as one, and I saw a man, faceless, pulling a girl from the river, as voices whispered, "The one who chooses without knowing shall awaken the 5th light." I gasped, nearly dropping the stone. Eliza Jonah's voice was far away, like I was underwater again. I looked at him, and I knew. "It's you," I whispered. He stiffened. "What do you mean?" I turned to the elder. "Is it true?" He nodded. "The prophecy said she would fall to the river and be returned by the hand of the outsider, one not bound by the old ways, one who acts not from duty, but from heart." Jonah stared at us like he'd wandered into someone else's dream. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. "Hell, I barely asked my neighbors for salt. And now you're telling me I'm supposed to be some kind of bridge?" "You didn't choose the story," I said gently, "but it chose you." Later, after the riders had set up camp just beyond Jonah's fence line, he sat alone on a tree stump sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. I joined him sitting across from the fire. He didn't look up. "I can't be what they need," he said. "They don't need a hero," I replied. "They just need someone who doesn't run." He glanced up at me then, and in the firelight, I saw something crack in him, something old and rusted, finally letting go. "I saved you because I could not save you," he said. "But that doesn't make me noble. It makes me human." And that, I whispered, is exactly why it matters. But as the flames danced and the night grew quiet, a different sound stirred in the trees, a rustle that did not belong to wind or wildlife. Jonah heard it too. He stood scanning the dark tree line, and that's when I saw them. Two riders watching from a distance. No colors, no symbols, just shadows mounted on horses holding rifles they hadn't yet raised. "They're not with the tribes," Jonah muttered. "No," I said. "They're the ones who think the prophecy is a threat." He turned to me, his jaw tight. "They're coming for you." I shook my head. "They're coming for us." And just like that, the calm was over. How do you run from something that already knows your name? They didn't speak. Not that night, not the next morning. They just sat their horses at the edge of the trees, still as shadows, watching the camp with eyes that never blinked. It was the silence that unsettled us the most. The kind of silence that follows a promise of blood. Jonah didn't sleep. He moved like a man expecting a bullet in the back, quiet, calculated, tense. When he wasn't standing outside with his rifle, he was oiling it by firelight, his eyes flickering with thoughts he couldn't say aloud. "You think they're government?" he asked once, his voice barely more than a rasp. I shook my head. "They're worse. They're believers." He stared at me, confused. I didn't explain, because how do you explain a war that hasn't started but has already chosen its soldiers? By mid-morning, the tribal elders met beneath the cottonwood again, their faces more lined than yesterday. I could see it in their eyes. They had smelled the coming storm too. I sat beside Wakan, my fingers still tingling from the stones, pulse hidden beneath the shawl across my lap. "The Watchers." Wakan said, his voice grave, came earlier than we hoped. "You knew they would?" I asked. He nodded. "When old systems begin to crumble, those who profited from them come clawing back." Jonah stood near the edge of the circle, arms crossed, unreadable. Another elder, a woman with hawk feathers braided into silver hair, poked next. "They are the fingers of the old world. They do not come to question. They come to claim." Jonah stepped forward, jaw set. "Claim what exactly?" "The right to silence the prophecy," Wakan replied. "And the girl who carries it." I felt his words sink into me like cold water. That afternoon, the riders emerged from the trees. No invitation, no warning, just dust and steel and eyes that looked through you instead of at you. They came with a third horse between them, dragging a prisoner slumped in the saddle, bloodied, but breathing. When they reached the edge of the camp, they shoved the man off and let him collapse in the dirt. I recognized him before he even raised his face. Marshall Lane Carraway, my father's old friend, the same man who stood beside me at my mother's funeral telling me to be strong, the same man who handed me over to the missionary boarding school for my own good. Jonah cursed under his breath. "Marshall says you're harboring a traitor," one of the riders spat, eyes locked on Jonah. Says the government's laid claim to this land and to the asset buried beneath it. Asset. That word felt like a stone between my ribs. The marshal coughed, wiped blood from his lip, and lifted his eyes to mine. Eliza Renfield, he said hoarsely. You're under arrest for sedition, obstruction, and theft of classified federal property. The camp erupted in shouts. Jonah raised his rifle. I stepped forward, stone burning in my hand beneath the shawl. She doesn't belong to you, Watkins said, rising. She belongs to no one. She belongs to the law, Caraway growled. No, I said, stepping forward. I belong to the truth. That night, no one slept easy. Around the fire, the stone pulsed gently in my palm, its light faint, but alive. Jonah sat across from me, hunched over, staring into the flames like they might offer clarity. His face was drawn, shoulders heavy with choices. He didn't speak at first. Then, that man knew your family? He baptized me when I was 5. I said, staring at the stone. He turned me in when I was 9. Jonah exhaled slowly. And now he's here to drag you back. No, I said. He's here to bury what I carry. Jonah looked up. This stone, it's not just some holy relic, is it? I shook my head. It's not power. It's a test. His voice was quiet. A test for who? For anyone who thinks they get to decide what peace looks like. Later that night, when the fires burned low and the camp had fallen quiet, Jonah found me standing beneath the cottonwood, staring up at the stars. He approached slowly like he wasn't sure I wanted him there. I keep thinking he said softly about the first time I saw you in that river. You looked like a ghost. I turned to him, smiled faintly. Maybe I was. He stepped closer. But now you look alive, scared, furious, real. I swallowed hard. And how do you look? He didn't answer, just reached out, brushed a damp strand of hair from my cheek. I've been alone a long time, he said. I got good at not wanting things I couldn't have. I met his eyes, and now he didn't speak, just leaned forward slowly and kissed me. It wasn't fierce, it wasn't desperate. It was quiet, steady, like he was choosing me the same way he chose to pull me from that river without reason, without fear. When we parted, I didn't say anything. I just rested my forehead against his chest and let him wrap his arms around me. Because maybe that was the most revolutionary thing left to do, to hold on, to feel, to refuse to become what the world expected. But when dawn came, so did the smoke on the horizon, and with it, the promise of cavalry, the kind that didn't come to talk. We stood on the ridge together, Jonah's hand wrapped around mine as dust clouds billowed in the east. He looked at me. Whatever's coming, he said, we face it together. I nodded. Because the world wasn't going to wait for us to be ready, and the storm we feared was already here, was already. Chapter 4. How do you choose between the blood that made you and the land that calls you back? The first shot was never fired, but I heard it, in my bones. It was the sound of horses breaking the horizon, a sound that split the wind like the end of peace. The cavalry came, not with banners, but with bayonets drawn and eyes hollowed out by orders. I could feel the earth shake beneath their hooves before I even saw their silhouettes burn against the red Wyoming dust. Jonah pulled me behind him, his hand brushing my waist, not out of possession, but instinct. His body wasn't a shield. It was a question. Will you run? Or will you finally stand? I stepped beside him. Not behind. The tribal circle had not moved. Smoke still drifted up from the fire pit where the last white sage burned. The children had stopped singing. The old women had stopped rocking. The men had not picked up their weapons, and yet no one was afraid, because this time we weren't kneeling. Captain Thorne reined in his steed before the clearing flanked by 50 men in uniform. The sun glinted off their barrels and their buttons, but their faces were already sweating. Not from heat, from uncertainty. They expected savages. They found stillness. Thorne looked older than I remembered, but his voice was just as sharp. Eliza Renfield, you are under protective order. I've come to bring you home. He said home the way a jailer says cell. I stepped forward. My red dress, still heavy from yesterday's storm, clung to my legs. My bare feet pressed into soil I could finally feel as mine. The necklace of river stone Jonah had tied around me still pulsed faintly on my chest. "This is my home," I said. He didn't like that. His jaw ticked once. He looked past me to Jonah, to the elders, to the fire, to the silent crowd encircling us. "You've been poisoned by lies," he spat. "That tribe slaughtered settlers. Jonah Caddick is an outlaw. You think they see you as one of them? They'll bury you under the same tree when they're done using you." Jonah stepped forward. "No one here wants a war," he said loud and even. "But if you push into this circle, Captain History will remember who raised their weapon first." Captain Thorne laughed. "I don't answer to history. I answer to Washington. It would have ended there, if not for Silas." I hadn't seen him step from the trees, but there he stood, boots caked in ash coat torn, and my father's journal clutched in his hands like scripture. He looked thinner, grayer. But his voice trembled with something I'd never heard before. Not fear. Guilt. Captain Silas said, his voice cracking, "You need to read this." Thorne blinked. "Not now. It's evidence. Property deeds. Testimony. Maps of sacred land. Written in Henry Renfield's own hand. If you fire that rifle, you're not protecting anyone, you're committing erasure." The air changed. Like the wind itself was holding its breath. The captain looked at me. Then Silas. Then Jonah. Then the 50 people behind me, tribal, settler, child, elder, no longer just bystanders, witnesses. And I saw it. For one breathless moment, the crack in his resolve. The soldier inside him had orders, but the man had eyes. "Turn around," he ordered. The cavalry did not move. "Now." And slowly they did. That should have been the end. But before he left, Thorne turned back to me. "You think this land loves you because it sings your name. One day, girl, it'll bury you with the same silence it gave your mother." And that's when my heart broke in a place I didn't know I had left. Because he was right. The land doesn't love. It remembers. And it waits. That night, as the fire crackled and the people stayed, no one left the circle. I asked Jonah the question I hadn't dared. What if I don't belong fully to either world? He didn't answer right away. He just brushed hair from my face, kissed the river stone at my throat, and said, "Then maybe you were born to build a third." I cried after that. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like breathing for the first time in years. And I wrote this part of the story with my own hand under a cottonwood tree by firelight. Not in English, but in Lakota. Because sometimes the words you need are older than the language that tried to silence them. Chapter 5. If I burned, at least it was in my own name. Wyoming Territory, 1873, the morning after the storm. The dawn smelled like ash and river water. A pink sky bled into the waking land as I stepped barefoot onto the damp grass, my red dress wrinkled and smoke-scented. Jonah's coat was still draped across my shoulders, heavy with the night. The fire had died sometime before morning, but something inside me was still burning, slow and certain. I had chosen to stay. They gathered again at the cottonwood. Elders, townsfolk, even the children. Word had traveled faster than any rider that the girl they called Sold had stood against steel and law and hadn't flinched. A ring was cleared for me to speak. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need permission. Jonah stood at the edge of the circle mud, still on his boots, arms crossed, as if holding back his fear. Not of danger, but of what I'd become, what Eid claimed. Before I said, my voice trembling in the quiet, I thought I had to belong to someone to matter. I paused. A hawk circled above. I was wrong. Someone stepped forward then. It was Silas. He didn't wear his badge, just a worn shirt, eyes darker than I remembered. He looked older, humbled, maybe even haunted. The man who once negotiated my price like cattle now approached, as if every step might collapse beneath him. The crowd held its breath. "Let her speak," an elder said. Silas lowered his head. "I came to return something." He pulled a small paper from his coat, the deed. The one that made me property in exchange, a debt settled with flesh. He held it toward me like it might burn his skin. I didn't take it. Instead, I looked him in the eye. "What are you returning, the deed or the lie?" Silas swallowed. Both. It could have ended there, a clean handoff, a quiet walk away. But life doesn't forgive that easy, and redemption never comes cheap. Someone in the crowd shouted, "He sold you, and now he thinks a paper makes it right?" Others murmured. One woman threw down her basket. Jonah stepped forward, shoulders tense. But I raised my hand. "Let him speak," I said. Silas met my gaze, then turned to the others. I thought power came from ownership. I was taught that. His voice cracked. But what I owned, what I tried to control, I broke. He looked back at me. "She's not mine. She never was. And that's why I'm here." The wind picked up. Fireflies, confused by the daylight, hovered low in the grass like flickering witnesses. I bent, picked one up gently, and let it crawl across my fingers before releasing it. Then I stepped forward, took the deed, and tore it in half. The crowd gasped. The pieces fluttered to the ground like old skin. That night, we lit a fire not for warmth, but for memory. Jonah found me by the riverbank, my toes brushing the water. The sky was thick with stars, and for the first time in years, the land felt like it was breathing with me. "I thought you'd leave," I said softly. He crouched beside me, touched my hand. "I thought you'd send me away," he whispered. I smiled. "I might have, if you hadn't kissed me like that." He laughed under his breath, low and warm. What now? I looked toward the village, toward the cottonwood, toward the fire still glowing behind the hills. "We rebuild," I said. "Not just the land, us. We married by the river. No priest, no papers. Just my red dress, his mother's feather woven into my braid, and the sun breaking through clouds as the people we chose and who chose us formed a circle around the water. The same circle where I once stood, afraid. The same river that nearly took me. The same fire that now lit my soul. Years later, people would ask how we survived that day. How Jonah kept me from running. How I forgave Silas. How the town changed when a girl chose love over fear. I tell them I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I finally stopped apologizing for who I was born to become. And when they'd ask about the red dress, the one soaked in rain and tears and choice, I'd smile and say, that's when I stopped being hers, or his, or theirs. I was mine, because if I burned, at least it was in my own name. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, Eliza's story reminds us of the quiet strength found in listening to our inner compass even, when the noise of duty, shame, or fear tries to drown it out. For those of us who've spent decades carrying the weight of choices, some made in love, others in survival, this tale isn't just a story of the Wild West. It's a mirror. Perhaps you too have stood at a crossroads, torn between what's expected and what's true. You've known the ache of staying silent to keep peace, the guilt of wanting more, the longing for a second chance at something real. Eliza's defiance, her fierce love, her refusal to be defined by her past. These echo through every woman who has ever rebuilt herself and every man who's ever dared to guard something sacred. Jonah's transformation from a man hardened by solitude to someone who lets love break him open shows that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose differently. And the crowd, those who watched, judged, feared, and ultimately witnessed, remind us that even the bystanders have power to uphold, to shame, or to support. So, what do you choose today? To live by what once was or by what still could be? You've just heard one powerful story, but many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.